Hey guys, what's up? My name is Karis. Welcome to Fix Your Shitty Movement and episode 2 of the Strong Hip series. To me, it feels like episode 200 because I've done this so many fucking times and I keep getting problems, but I will not be deterred. This is my buddy Philippe here. Philippe is a little unstable, fits right in, but he is going to help me illustrate a few things as long as I don't touch him. I will also resist the urge to do some dirty, weird ventriloquist stuff with him, but I am only human after all. So in the last episode of Fix Your Shitty Movement, I said I like to think of the hips as either the bottom of your torso or the top of your legs, and I encourage people to think of it that way as well. This is a pretty important area, but that's what the hips are. They're kind of a general area with a lot of things going on, a lot of things converging. It is the midpoint between your upper body and your lower bodies. Today, we're discussing your torso or the hips as the bottom of your torso. So let's jump right in. At the bottom of your torso or your spine is your pelvis, and it's this bony bowl-like structure here. Your spine actually intersects it, and the vertebrae that are on it are your pelvic vertebrae. So on the face of your pelvis, you have 3 bony protrusions: your hip bones and your pubic bone. And if you place the heels of your hands on your hip bones and then fold your fingertips forward, if this forms a flat surface, you are in what's called a neutral pelvis. Your spine also has a neutral position. Spine starts at the base of the skull, the neck curves in slightly, then your thoracic spine curves out slightly, lumbar vertebrae curve back in. This is where it intersects the spine. You have some fused vertebrae called your sacrum, and then your tailbone, which is right jaw. Nature designed us this way for impact absorption and to resist the shearing forces of gravity and all that shit. But it's really important to remember that no one is as perfect as Philippe is here. Who could be? We all are on a spectrum. All sorts of things are going to influence where you are on the spectrum. Our posture, our lifestyle, injuries, trauma, all sorts of shit. One of the main things that I try to do in here is teach you how to find your neutral, how to optimize it, and how to both stabilize it and move within it. So for most lifting purposes, like anything that's axially loaded or loading your spine, squat, deadlift, bent row, we generally want to optimize your neutral position. A really important thing to keep in mind is that if the pelvis is not neutral, then your spine is not neutral. However, you can be a neutral pelvis and not be in neutral spine. In other words, your pelvis is dependent on the movement of your spine. That's really important to keep in mind in movements like the squat. One issue that people have in the squat, especially the back squat, is that they lack the thoracic mobility to keep their upper back this way, or really the upper back strength to resist the force of the barbell pushing them this way. But the same goes where if you have like a goblet squat and the weight is here pulling you this way, right? It can be really easy to think that you are neutral in a back squat when in actuality you aren't. And when you're flexed forward like this, hinging your hips is like pretty much impossible, right? Why is that? Well, a hip hinge is hip flexion. So this. Why is that important? Your primary hip flexor, your psoas, actually starts at your thoracic spine on T12. Keep that in mind. So through your abdomen and then to the front of your hip. It then merges with another hip flexor muscle called your iliacus. So you might know your hip flexor muscle as your iliopsoas. That's what the fuck that is. So the position of the psoas, though, makes it really important because while it is responsible for hip flexion, try not to kick Philippe, he'll be pissed. High kick. It also assists in some spinal flexion and like in stabilizing your spine. So you can see how if I'm flexed this way, right, and like already utilizing, I guess, my psoas and not in neutral spine, I really can't hinge my hips back, right? The barbell's here. If I try to hinge, it's going to move forward over my toes, right? Or I'm going to come straight down. It's not my favorite, but whatever. It's just food for thought. Stay with me. T12 is actually a pretty important juncture. So other muscles that start there as your diaphragm, which is hugely important. We're going to circle back to that guy. Also your transverse abdominis, which is that corset-like muscle that runs horizontally. Also your quadratus lumborum or your QL, we'll circle back to that, and things like your obliques and shit like that. A lot of really important stuff happens there. A lot of really important nerves live there. So let's start with the diaphragm. Your diaphragm is this dome-shaped muscle. It is essential to life. It's a respiratory muscle. So when you inhale and your lungs expand, your diaphragm descends to accommodate for that expansion. I would use Philippe, but he doesn't have any muscle. He's not alone, but he's a little embarrassed about it. Okay. That descent creates some intra-abdominal pressure, which is what people are going for when they're lifting and want to do this big diaphragmatic breath. There's also a pelvic diaphragm, aka the pelvic floor. And what we also want is for this to ascend to help create some of that intra-abdominal pressure. Remember that the spine is a series of joints, and we really want to have it do as much as possible, right? Extension and flexion and lateral flexion and rotation and all this shit. We want to maintain its ability to do that just like we do every other joint in our body for as long as possible, perhaps especially the spine. When we want to create this pillar with our torso, it's not the spine that we want to harden or make rigid. It's the muscles around the spine that we want to work together to hold that pillar in position while you move it as one unit, right? For an axially loaded movement, that is the goal. The understanding a lot of people have even of bracing is limited strictly to the diaphragm, in which they do this big, like big bad wolf breath and bear down. True or false? That's what you do when you're trying to take a shit. Don't invite that to the party, people. So pelvic floor. A lot more people are familiar with the pelvic floor nowadays, thanks to largely social media. But unfortunately, a lot of people still think and associate it with only people who've had children. So they like pee when they sneeze and all this stuff. We all have pelvic floors. Thank God. And it's pretty important for all of us. There's some pretty disgusting things that happen there. It's also kind of funny. It's where a lot of pleasure happens, disappointment. There's a lot going on there. So we really need to have a better understanding of it and how to access it and when to access it. So my default posture is to be in a slightly anteriorly tilted pelvis. See how these lines make it so easy for you to see? It's fine. It's just the way that I am. So if you were to visualize this part of my torso as like a part of a mattress that someone cut out, like a brand new mattress. So the springs all have the same give and bounce and all that shit. And then a person sleeps on this part for an extended period, and this part never gets slept on. This part, the springs get very like tight and compressed. They don't have any bounce. It's probably pretty uncomfortable and really doesn't have any spring-like qualities that we would like it to have, particularly in a mattress. And on the other side, these springs are very stretched out and also don't have any of the desirable qualities that we want in a mattress spring. You can imagine like a stretched out slinky, right? It's not able to do its slinky bullshit. So anyway, you can see, right, that my QL, right, among other things, is really tight, and that is very true. And so they are always more like in a compressed position, whereas my abdominals are in a like stretched out looser position, right? So how can we go about fixing that? Well, if you think about stretching, like child's pose or something, yes, movements like that feel really good on my back. However, we know now that you shouldn't do static stretching before you lift weights or work out. Why? Because when you're stretching, you're also decreasing the muscle's spring-like qualities and therefore its ability to produce power, which means you're very vulnerable. Your body's too loose, right? Okay, maybe take a yoga class a couple times a week. Well, just like I said, it's going to be a temporary stretched out position, right? So it's not like you do child's pose once and then you have like a loosey-goosey QL, right? Like it's going to go back to its original shape. That is unless you teach it not to. And that's where like muscle activation and really just strength training in general comes in, and muscle memory. So instead of just doing passive stretches on my lower back, right, to try to improve how much flexion I can get in my lower back, I am going to focus on strengthening the antagonist. So that's the stretched out part. How do I do that? Lots of different core exercises like planks, things that really focus on transverse abdominis, right? That's like that corset muscle, like I said. There's a lot of other things that go into it, but flexion exercises like hollow body holds are also really good for me because your lower back will flex along with your upper back, right? Like I said, it's a series of joints. They're going to follow each other. And this is really why Pilates changed my life like 20 some years ago, and has made my body feel so much better. Thank God for that. Can you imagine how batshit I was before I found something down tempo that focuses on breathing? But neutral for me is what neutral feels like is not neutral because I'm so fucking this all the time, right? So by biasing into a posteriorly tilted pelvis, I am able to get way closer to neutral than I would if I was just going for neutral, so to speak. I've been squatting for a long fucking time, but even after all these years, I still have to remind myself and really focus on not spilling the bucket. My tendency is to lose tension at the bottom of my squat, and that means that I come up with a duck butt. Signs that I've been doing this are maybe some tension in my QL, pinching, kind of feeling in my hips, shit like that. My squat just generally feels like shit, and I also struggle to hit depth. Why does this happen? Laziness. I'm in a rush. It's not like a conscious laziness, but it means I'm half-assing my warm-up movements, and I'm also just kind of racing through my reps or turning my sets into dick measuring contests instead of slowing the fuck down so that I can feel what's happening every step of the way. Tempos and pauses shall set you free, my friends. They will fix your shit better than anything because they'll show you so clearly exactly where the breakdown is and why it's happening. Why don't people do them? They're fucking miserable. You can do like the bar, especially if you do them properly. P.S. Properly usually means that someone has to count for you because sometimes I'll watch sets of my tempos and pauses and I'm like, that does not even look like I paused for 1 second. So be honest, kitties. Be honest with yourself. When you're hinging your hips, truly hinging your hips, right? Then your torso needs to stay moving as one unit. That means the top of your head and your butthole. Your tailbone, butthole, they're neighbors. It's the easiest way for you to identify where that is. And if you're doing a hip hinge, these guys need to stay in one long line. Like if I stuck a pole through Philippe's head, it would come right out his, butthole if he had one. So when I'm explosively locking out like a squat, for example, I want to flex the hell out of my quads and my glutes. And it's really like this, I call it like panini press action. I want everything to be engaged, right? So that I can be as like rock solid as possible. Remember, if your pelvis is moving around, that means that your spine is moving around. And this can be a really, really valuable way for you to start to understand what neutral is, where neutral is, and how your spine is moving in relationship to it. The most important part of the torso is the diaphragm and its relationship to so many other muscles that connect right there, and the nerves that branch off of it, and their responsibility in the core, especially in your lower abdominal muscles. Breathing and feet our like walking, all that shit. They're the most automatic things that we do. And they're the things we do the most autopilot. Thank God, because we don't have to fucking think about it. As such, they're the hardest things to correct. And also the most boring things to correct. But they are the low-hanging fruit, that weird fucking English expression that sounds like I'm talking about balls. Okay, if all you know of diaphragmatic breathing involves expanding here versus is very subtle, right? But you see how I expanded there, right? Also, if you look here, see how this pulled up? And exhaling is how we flex those muscles, right? So the exhale is really more important than the inhale. In an inhale, if we're trying to create intra-abdominal pressure and all that horse shit, it's really just like a sip of air, and we're trying to maintain or even tighten as we go. So intercostal breathing is a lateral breathing, and the easiest way to feel that or connect with that is really to connect with your lats. Lats also all up in T12. And the easiest way to connect with that is your triceps. Easiest way to connect with that is your pinky. So if you squeeze your pinky, right, like around the weight or something, you should feel like more engagement in your tricep. Now, if you flex your tricep while you do that, see how that automatically depressed my scapula and recruited my lat? And then if I take that a step further, I get my obliques, right? And so all these guys are buddies. It's hard to get to the point, or it's time consuming, and it takes a lot of practice to get to the point where you feel your back expanding, independent of rising shoulders and all that shit. But the easiest way for you to start locating that connection is right here. Feeling lateral expansion when you're trying to do things like anything core related, because that's really what's going to tie it all in. But also, pull-ups or scap pull-ups or lat pull-downs, anything like that. Tricep extensions are a big one. If you pay attention, you should feel your core a lot in tricep extensions. That's not an accident. If you need some suggestions for exercises that will fucking destroy your core, take Pilates. Pilates breathing is intercostal breathing, also connecting there. And they're respiratory muscles, and it means that you breathe laterally, still diaphragm, but we are not expanding or relaxing the abdomen. Seems pretty fucking key if you're going to do any kind of lifting, right? So, you do Pilates once or twice a week instead of yoga that's not really benefiting you. I hope you're seeing more and more. I don't dislike yoga. I dislike people just mindlessly doing shit and adding more shit to their plate when it's not actually doing anything for them. So what Pilates will do is give you an opportunity to zero in on all of these things I'm talking about. It's about body control and breathing mechanics and, being able to move the upper half of your spine and the lower half of your spine without influencing one another or trying not to as much as possible. Also your shoulder blades, which people cannot fucking keep separate from their spine. Because if I say retract, people do this, right? If I say protract, people do this. If you can't differentiate between those things, you're going to have a fucking problem with lifting. You don't have to do Pilates. It's just a suggestion. But whether people know it or not, in here, Pilates is integrated into everything we do. And my number one concern with my clients is that they feel good. Like nothing fucking matters if you're getting hurt when you're working out, which is supposed to make you better. Then what they're amazed to learn and finally see is that focusing on that usually gives them everything else that they want. They get stronger, they perform better, and they look better. That's why my little fucking tagline is what it is, because it's all the same shit. But we all just want to race to perform better and look better without actually addressing the shit at hand. These are all really major players. Your glutes, we're going to address with the lower half next episode. So like sometime next year. But also the deep six muscles in your hips or in your pelvis. But your feet are going to be a really, really important part for the reasons I just mentioned. Rooting, attaching yourself to the ground. It seems so fucking obvious, but if you think about like pushing the floor away with your feet when you're trying to squat or something, it's like, oh, that's right, I have feet. That's the other cue I need to hear all the time. 20 some odd years of lifting. Lose the ego. We're all dying, rotting, evolving, Work with your body. Notice when it changes, or notice when you're just like half-assing it, because that's often the problem, to use low-hanging fruit again, which sounds like I'm talking about balls. All right, so this was episode 2 of the Strong Hip series. Next time is episode 3, the lower half of the body. My name's Karis. Thanks for watching.